Okay, well listen, thanks so much to Connolly Books for organising this and for yourselves for turning out. There's no doubt about it, it's incredibly timely as the voices of peace, of diplomacy, of international cooperation have never been more needed as militarisation grips Europe. And militarisation, of course, is the anathema of feminism. They're opposites. They cannot be reconciled. And yet everywhere we look, girl washing now is the order of the day, totally co-opted by the military-industrial complex. We see them ruthlessly exploiting the language of feminism, the cause of equality, the resistance to all forms of violence, discrimination and exploitation, the cause of care of ourselves and the planet. Everywhere you turn, you can see it. We see it in von der Leyen, in Kaja Kallas, in Annalena Baerbock, women who greenlight genocide, who call for the breakup of Russia, who legitimise the targeting of civilians in Gaza. My God, what progress that is. We see them ruthlessly and cynically capturing the language and trying to integrate UN Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security, as an integral part of NATO somehow, debasing the years and decades of tireless anti-militarist work of the women who drafted it and turning it into something like, well, militarisation, but for everyone, it's okay now. So let's be clear about this to start with. There is no reconciling NATO. There is no changing them. There is no softening them. There's no way of making them responsive to gender needs. NATO is a tool of Western domination, and the only feminist NATO, to be honest, is a disbanded one. So we should start with that point. And we should make the point that when Micheál Martin says, oh, well, don't worry about it, we'll keep our military neutrality, we won't join NATO, it's a red herring, it's a smokescreen, because European defence or militarisation is a better word for it, is absolutely bound hand in glove with NATO at this stage, even with Donald Trump throwing them under the bus. I don't think we can look at neutrality or defence policy in the current situation in Ireland without absolutely anchoring it in Europe. And I don't think that that is recognised strongly enough in the Oireachtas, with a few very strong independent exceptions to that. So, as the Chair said, we meet today against the backdrop of the EU announcing 800 billion on defence in their new Rearm EU programme. Except the truth is, it actually isn't new at all. The McKinsey report on European defence, which was done last February, pinpointed on the button that exact figure. 800 billion by 2028 and 500 billion every year after that. This is the road they've been on already since the Lisbon Treaty. There is nothing new in it. And I think I just want to touch on a few of those sort of landmarks on how we got here. 2008, the Lisbon Treaty, it gave the European Union a legal character, a high representative. Unfortunately, they're the lowest specimens of humanity that I can find, but in any case, and we talked about the common security and defence policy and so on. Move on a couple of years, by 2016 then, they were talking about, well, soft power isn't enough, we need to man up. And to do that, they convened a group of personalities. They weren't pop stars or internet influencers. They were actually made up of a majority of the arms companies. The majority on that committee were arms companies represented. And they were asked, how are we going to make Europe safe? And they said, we have a right good idea for you. You've got to spend more on defence. And the very same people who designed that policy benefited from it. So in 2019, we had the European Defence Fund, the first time direct expenditure from an EU budget on militarisation. We had the European Peace Facility. I particularly hate that one because it's such a wrong name for what it is. It replaced the African Peace Facility, which specifically excluded, it was a development programme, and it specifically excluded the expenditure being spent on arms. Whereas the European Peace Facility specifically allows you to spend it on arms. And what started at 6 billion is now at 17 billion, 11 billion of that going to Ukraine. We've had military mobility, the rapid deployment defence capacity, the strategic compass. This was a plan that we'd all believed that we were all faced the same common threats. Now, they had a real problem with that one, of course, until Russia invaded Ukraine. And after that, the whole policy was absolutely turbocharged. Since then, European defence policy has been absolutely aligned with NATO. Checkbooks were opened, and we had this alphabet soup of programmes: 500 million for ASAP for ammunition, 300 million for IDIRPA, which is the procurement programme. They actually robbed 8.5 billion out of an environmental programme STEP. It was 10 billion. They took 8.5 billion of it out and put it in defence. That's what we've had, 50 billion for the Ukraine facility. And we have to say loudly, none of this has helped the people of Ukraine. None of this has made Europe any safer. And repeating it now is not going to change those outcomes at all. Because the truth is that the war in Ukraine happened against the backdrop of massive levels of increased military expenditure, not because we weren't militarist enough. And now, of course, with the prospect of the war ending, they're in total panic mode. Because who in their right mind is going to agree to that amount of public money being spent on weapons to kill people when there's so much need and human need out there, not to mention the race to deal with climate change. So now we have a new story. This is what it is, and they're in a total war frenzy now. Oh my God, the Americans are leaving us. We're on our own. We're totally unsafe. What are we going to do? And we have to, I think, kind of start by this by saying this is absolute nonsense. It is a total con at every level. The prospect of peace in Ukraine, which they're almost, treating as a declaration of war or something, is a good thing. The prospect of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians not being slaughtered and the further erosion of Ukrainian territory not happen is a good thing. Negotiations were always the only way in which Ukraine could protect itself. It was always the case, and it's really tragic that it didn't happen with Minsk. It didn't happen with the Istanbul Accord, which the Ukrainians and the Russians agreed on shortly after the war took place. And it was the West, it was the US and Europe who stopped that agreement being in place, who told Ukraine to fight on. And obviously that failed horrifically. And Donald Trump doesn't want to be part of that, so he's moving on. And tragically, I think Europe fell for what was always a game led by the US of NATO's expansion to Russia's borders. Instead of being non-aligned, instead of avoiding runaway military expenditure, instead of standing by the UN Charter and arguing, as our Constitution does, for the peaceable resolution of conflict, and as the UN does, that's what it's supposed to be about. Instead of developing their own relations with the rest of the world, they severed ties with Russia, decoupled from China, decimated European industry, pauperised the people of Europe with a cost of living crisis, and ended up being more economically and military dependent on the US. I mean, you absolutely couldn't make this stuff up. And now Trump has dumped them, and they're doing the same thing all over again. Because despite all of the bravado of the power through strength, straight out of Netanyahu's playbook, I might add, but it's the buzzword everywhere now, the truth is that they're still firmly subordinated to US interests, and they're still whimpering and simpering before Donald Trump, because 2 weeks actually, before Trump was inaugurated, he demanded that NATO members increase their expenditure by 5%. Now Germany's already on 2%, the Baltics on 5%, Poland on about 4%, and now they're all standing to attention. They're all going to ratchet it up. So let's look at this a little bit. Total global military expenditure reached $2.4 trillion in 2023. NATO members on their own, it was 1.26 trillion. If they increase that to 2%, it'd be 2.57 billion. And they're looking for 5%. Apart from the madness of all of this and the catastrophic damage that it does, who's going to be paying for all of those bills. And in fairness to the Financial Times, they were on the button this week when they came out loud and clear. Europe must trim welfare to provide a warfare state. But, they went on, and I mean, in fairness, they're being honest for once. They're always a little bit more slightly honest than the rest of them. And they say, the question is whether the public agrees. Rich democratic states, that's us, believe it or not, rich democratic states can make difficult reforms only in a crisis. Chronic discomfort isn't enough. An element of real fear has to come into it. And perhaps that is now. And we see the media enabling a state of frenzy. Will the French nuclear umbrella protect us all? The Finnish government are issuing memos to their people about emergency stocks. Get some solar battery radios for the emergency so we can stay in contact with you. Germany is reintroducing conscription. On and on it goes, and nowhere in the media is there a critical analysis of the facts or the implications of this lunacy. So this is where we are, at an incredibly dangerous juncture. And Gaza was the harbinger of that. It really was. I mean, bonfiring international law in a genocide, openly declared and carrying out, that didn't happen by accident. They knew what they were doing in that. And, you know, they enabled it at every turn. I don't need to tell people there, and I won't waste time on it. Arming Israel, not breaking the association agreement, openly defying the International Criminal Court records, on and on it goes. And we have to see the assault on Ireland's neutrality in that context. They were never fond of it in our establishment, but now they're going full on. But the triple lock that Alice Mary and we'll deal with in the discussion, it's absolutely part of that. All of the things were flagged in the consultation forum on security 2 years ago. Disinformation, the UN veto, cyber security, our cables, oh no, the cables. All of this absolute nonsense. The EU has been pushing this agenda for a very long time now. And now they're going full frontal for it. Irish neutrality, and let's be clear about this, it is a prize for them because they recognise that it's a beacon for everybody else in Europe. I've been at meetings in Sweden, Norway recently, haven't been to Finland, but I'm sure they're not that different, although listening to their foreign minister on RTE a few weeks ago, maybe they are, but people probably aren't. But in those countries, they didn't have a say on their neutrality being ended. We're the only ones who have a say on European treaties. I was at an event in Germany at the start of January, thousands of anti-war and pro-Palestinian activists assembling in Germany, and not a single elected political party to represent fully their views. They know that an independent, neutral Ireland would be a very strong beacon to that. And for us here at home, no amount of money spent on defence or Simon Harris's fighter jets are going to make us safe. I mean, look at the size of Ukraine by comparison to Ireland. It doesn't make any logical sense at all. But what we could do is use our unique position as being entrenched in the global north, but with an affinity with the global south, to stand up for international law, as we did when we joined the United Nations. And little Ireland were the ones who got through the first nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So that's what real neutrality is, and that's what they're trying to destroy. Because the only way forward is de-escalation, disarmament, diplomacy, and cooperation. The founding principles of feminism, that's the only way to guarantee our future. And it was brilliant this week to see Mothers Against Genocide firmly coming out on this issue and saying we are not going to allow our sons and daughters to go to kill or be killed. And it's that feeling, it's that empathy, it's that roots that founded the feminist movement and the roots of ordinary people that will be the nugget to defeat it. Because, in conclusion, militarism really is just the trick of the world's rich to distract away from their greed, away from its proper target, to all these external and internal enemies who are everywhere, away from a system that sees just over 2,000 billionaires with more wealth than 60% of the world's population. And a truly neutral Ireland is the only platform from which we can fight for truth and justice. And in the loosely adapted words of Rosa Luxemburg, the most revolutionary action that anyone can take is to loudly proclaim things as they really are. That's our task going from this meeting, and I hope we all embrace it.